Here's something that doesn't make sense on the surface. The typical American household earns $84,000 a year. Unemployment is near historic lows. The stock market has been hitting record highs. Inflation has cooled from its peak. By almost every headline measure, things should feel fine. And yet, 2/3 of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck right now. Half of all working-age adults have little to nothing saved for retirement, and the median bank account balance across the country is $8,000. Not $80,000, $8,000. So what's actually going on? Why does $84,000 a year feel like barely enough? Or in many cases, not enough at all? That's exactly what this video is going to answer. Not with vague financial advice, with the actual numbers. The real picture of what the typical American earns, spends, owes, and has saved in 2026. And more importantly, the math behind why so many households feel stuck even when their income sounds reasonable. Stay with me through this one, because the most important number in this entire video isn't coming until later, and it's the one that reframes everything else. Before we get into the stats, I want to introduce you to a household. We'll call them the Martins. Marcus and Diana Martin are 43 years old. They live in the Midwest. Marcus works in logistics management. Diana works part-time in healthcare administration. Together they bring in about $88,000 a year, right at the median for their age group. They own a home they bought 6 years ago. They have 2 kids. They have credit card debt. They have a 401k that neither of them looks at very often because the balance makes them uncomfortable. By most measures, the Martins are doing okay. They're not in crisis, but they don't feel okay. Every month feels tight. Retirement feels abstract and far away even though it isn't. And no matter how many times they tell themselves they'll start saving more next month always looks exactly like this month. The Martins are not a real family, but they are a real financial situation. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why their life feels the way it does, and what the numbers say about how to change it. Let's start with income. The median household income in America sits at roughly $84,000 a year in 2026. That's the midpoint. Half of households earn more, half earn less. But that single number hides something important. Income changes dramatically depending on where you are in life. Here's how it actually breaks down by age. Households under 25 bring in roughly $38,000 to $42,000 a year. Early careers, part-time work, people still finding their footing. By 25 to 34, that climbs to around $62,000 to $66,000. Careers gain traction. Dual incomes become more common. From 35 to 44, income reaches $78,000 to $85,000. These are the years most people think of as their prime earning years. Peak earnings hit between 45 and 54, where the typical household brings in $88,000 to $95,000 annually. After that, income starts easing. From 55 to 64, households earn roughly $80,000 to $86,000. And for households 65 and older, median income drops to around $55,000 to $62,000. A combination of Social Security, pensions, and continued part-time work. Now here's the thing that jumps out. Even at peak earning years, the typical American household is not making 6 figures. They're approaching it, but they're not there. And that matters enormously once you start layering in what life actually costs. Now that we've talked about income, let's shift our focus to spending, because income is only half the equation. What the typical household spends tells an equally important story. And the pattern mirrors income almost exactly. Costs rise through midlife, then ease as obligations fall away. Households under 25 spend around $28,000 to $32,000 annually. By 25 to 34, spending jumps to $55,000 to $60,000 as housing costs rise and lifestyles expand. Between 35 and 44, typical spending reaches $70,000 to $75,000. It peaks from 45 to 54 at around $78,000 to $83,000 a year. Then it starts declining. From 55 to 64, households spend about $68,000 to $72,000. And households 65 and older typically spend $50,000 to $54,000 per year. Important note: these spending figures represent cost of living only. Housing, transportation, food, utilities, healthcare, clothing. Not a single dollar of savings or retirement contributions is included in these numbers. So let's do the math for the Martins. They earn $88,000 a year. Their age group typically spends $80,000 just to live. That leaves $8,000 of margin for the entire year, about $667 a month. For retirement savings, emergency fund, kids' college, home repairs, and anything unexpected, $667. That's not a character flaw, that's arithmetic. And for millions of households, the arithmetic is even tighter than that. Spending isn't the full picture. There's a hidden threat most people don't notice. Debt, the silent budget killer. Now let's add the weight that's quietly crushing that margin even further. Total household debt in America hit $18.8 trillion by the end of 2025. A record. The average adult owes about $63,000 across mortgages, auto loans, student loans, and credit cards. But the number that matters most for daily life isn't the total balance, it's the monthly payment. Because that's what eats into the margin we just calculated. Credit card debt alone reached $1.28 trillion nationally. The average balance for households carrying credit card debt is around $11,000. The average interest rate on those cards is sitting near 23%. Here's the math on that. If you carry $11,000 on a credit card at 23% interest and make only minimum payments, you will spend 22 years paying it off. You will pay nearly $18,500 in interest alone. By the time the balance hits zero, you'll have paid close to $30,000 to eliminate $11,000 of debt, and 47% of credit card holders carry a balance month to month. A quarter of them make only the minimum payment. 1 in 4 people with credit card debt are on the 22-year plan, paying interest on interest on interest while the balance barely moves. Now here's the part that gets overlooked in most conversations about debt. When researchers ask people why they carry credit card balances, only 10% point to retail purchases, things they bought and didn't need. The majority, 41%, cite emergency expenses, medical bills, car repairs, a busted water heater. Another 33% point to everyday necessities, groceries, utilities, childcare. This is not a story about reckless spending. This is a story about people using credit cards to survive because the margin ran out. The Martins have $9,000 on 2 credit cards. They didn't charge vacations or furniture. One card covered a transmission repair 2 years ago. The other quietly accumulated through months where the grocery bill was higher than expected and the paycheck wasn't quite enough. Their minimum payments on those cards are $180 a month. That's $2,160 a year, coming directly out of that $8,000 margin. Now they have $5,840 left for everything else. This is how the squeeze works. It's not dramatic, it's gradual, it's math applied to a life. Even after paying off everything, your wallet still hurts. Meet your invisible enemy. Inflation, the baseline, nobody talks about. Now let's talk about something that made all of this significantly worse, and that most financial headlines have stopped covering. The official inflation rate has cooled to around 2.4% annually. That sounds normal, reasonable, under control, but inflation is cumulative. The rate measures how fast prices are rising right now. It doesn't measure how much higher prices already are compared to where they were. And that distinction is everything. Since 2020, cumulative inflation has reached approximately 25%. Something that cost $100 in early 2020 now costs $125. That higher baseline doesn't go away just because the rate slowed down. Groceries are up 25 to 30% compared to pre-pandemic levels. Rents rose 20 to 30% in most markets. Home prices climbed 30 to 40%. Mortgage rates more than doubled, from around 3% to 6 or 7%, which in many cases literally doubled the monthly payment for new buyers. Auto insurance increased 30 to 50% in many states. Homeowners insurance jumped 20 to 40%. Here's a simple way to feel what that means. If your household spent $60,000 a year before 2020, that same lifestyle now costs $72,000 to $75,000. If your income didn't grow by the same percentage, you are effectively poorer today than you were 5 years ago, even if your paycheck looks bigger. And for the Martins, their combined income grew about 12% since 2020. Their cost of living grew closer to 25%. They didn't spend more carelessly. The world around them got more expensive faster than their income could follow. This is why so many people who are working harder than ever feel further behind than ever. Housing, where the divide becomes visible. The single biggest financial fault line in America right now runs directly through housing. The median home price sits around $410,000 to $430,000. The median household income is $84,000. That ratio, home price to income, is now near historic highs. And to comfortably afford the median home at current prices and mortgage rates, most financial guidelines suggest you need income closer to $110,000 to $120,000. That's 40 to 50% more than what the typical household actually earns. The monthly payment shift tells the story most clearly. In 2020, a median-priced home with a 3% mortgage meant a payment around $1,300 to $1,400 a month. Today, with higher prices and rates near 6.5%, that same home costs roughly $2,600 a month, nearly double, in 5 years. According to the National Association of Home Builders, roughly 75% of American households cannot afford a median-priced new home. 3 out of 4 families are priced out. But here's the number that quietly explains an enormous amount of the wealth gap in America. The typical homeowner has a median net worth of around $400,000. The typical renter has a median net worth of about $10,000 to $15,000. That is a 25 to 40 times difference in wealth. And it holds even when you compare homeowners and renters at age 65 and older. The Martins bought their home 6 years ago at a 3.8% rate. Their home has appreciated significantly. That equity is quietly building in the background, even on months when their checking account feels dangerously low. They don't feel wealthy, but their balance sheet looks very different from their neighbor who has been renting the same apartment for 6 years and whose rent has gone up $600 a month in that time. Homeownership isn't right for everyone, but the data is hard to argue with. For households who can access it, it remains one of the most reliable wealth-building paths available. Not because of anything glamorous, but because a fixed mortgage stays fixed while rent keeps climbing, and because every payment quietly builds equity, whether you think about it or not. Retirement. The number most people avoid looking at this is the section most people are either worried about or avoiding entirely. Roughly 40 to 45% of households approaching retirement have less than $100,000 saved in retirement accounts. 1 in 4 working-age adults has no retirement savings at all, and over half of American households have no dedicated retirement savings of any kind. Meanwhile, financial planners estimate the typical retiree needs around $1.26 million to retire comfortably. Let's look at where people actually stand by age. Workers in their 20s have a median 401k balance of around $2,800. In their 30s, it grows to roughly $15,000. In their 40s, around $35,000 to $61,000. In their 50s, the median reaches about $87,000 to $90,000. And for people already at or past retirement age, median savings hover around $88,000. $88,000 at retirement age. At a standard 4% withdrawal rate, that generates roughly $3,500 a year, about $291 a month from savings. Social Security adds the average benefit of about $2,100 a month. Combined, that's around $2,400 a month to live on. The median monthly expenses for a household 65 and older run $4,200 to $4,500. The gap between income and expenses in retirement, for the typical household, is real and significant. And Social Security, which currently faces projected trust fund depletion around 2033 unless Congress acts, was never designed to close that gap alone. It was designed to replace about 40% of pre-retirement income. Most retirees need 70 to 80% replaced to maintain their lifestyle. Marcus Martin is 43. He has $48,000 in his 401k. Diana has $22,000 in hers. Combined, $70,000. That puts them slightly ahead of the median for their age group. But here's the number they haven't sat down to calculate. At their current savings rate, with average market returns, they are projected to retire with somewhere between $280,000 and $340,000. Against a target of $1.26 million, they are, by current trajectory, roughly $900,000 short. Not because they're irresponsible, because the margin was always too tight, the debt took a piece of it, and the years kept passing. Here's the insight I promised you at the beginning. You've now seen the full picture. Income, spending, debt, inflation, housing, retirement. And if you look at it all together, a pattern emerges that most financial content misses entirely. The typical American household isn't in trouble because of the decisions they made. They're in trouble because of the sequence of decisions, or more accurately, the sequence in which costs arrive versus the sequence in which wealth-building tools become accessible. When you're young, your income is lowest and your debts are just beginning. Student loans, a car, maybe an early credit card that gets away from you. Before any real savings can accumulate, monthly obligations already consume most of the margin. By the time income rises, lifestyle has expanded to meet it. Housing costs have jumped. Kids have arrived. The debt from earlier years is still being serviced. Retirement feels distant enough to defer. By the time retirement is close enough to feel urgent, the compounding years are mostly behind you. This is not a failure of discipline. It is a failure of timing, a structural trap where the costs of adult life are front-loaded and the wealth-building window is back-loaded. And the two never quite sync up for most households. Understanding this doesn't fix the problem, but it does change what the solution looks like. Because if the trap is sequential, the escape has to be sequential too. You can't fix everything at once, but you can identify which intervention made now reshapes the most years ahead. Here's what's genuinely surprising about the data. Median household net worth has increased 37% since 2019, the largest jump since tracking began. And that growth was not limited to wealthy households. Middle-class families saw significant gains, primarily through home equity appreciation and rising retirement account values. A record number of households have crossed the $1 million net worth threshold in recent years, not through inheritance, not through luck, through owning a home before prices doubled, investing consistently through market cycles, and allowing compound growth to do what it does over decades. The average household net worth tells an aspirational story too. For households aged 55 to 64, average net worth sits around $1.6 million. For 65 to 74, it's approximately $1.8 million. Two very different outcomes from the same economy. What separates them is not income level, not intelligence. It's the timing and consistency of a handful of decisions made across 20 or 30 years. The Martins still have time, not infinite time, but enough time that the decisions they make in the next 5 years will matter more than almost anything they've done financially so far. Actionables. What actually moves the needle? These aren't generic tips. They follow directly from everything we just covered. First, calculate your actual margin, not a budget, your margin. Take monthly after-tax income, subtract monthly fixed expenses and debt payments, and see what's left. Whatever that number is, that's your lever. Everything else flows from protecting and growing it. Second, attack the debt with the highest interest rate first. Not the smallest balance, not the one that feels most psychologically satisfying, the one charging 23%. Every month you carry that balance, it is actively shrinking your future. A $9,000 credit card balance paid off in 18 months instead of 22 years saves thousands in interest and frees up monthly cash flow permanently. Third, lock in your largest fixed expenses. Inflation hit hardest the people exposed to rising costs in every category simultaneously. A fixed-rate mortgage is protection against rising rents. A paid-off vehicle you keep driving is protection against rising car prices. Stability in your biggest expenses often matters more than increases in income. Fourth, automate retirement contributions before the margin disappears. The reason most people undersave isn't that they spend it on frivolous things. It's that the margin gets absorbed by life before the investment happens. Automation removes the decision. Even $200 a month started at $40 becomes meaningfully different from $200 a month started at $50 due to compounding. Fifth, plan for a longer retirement than feels necessary. At 65, the average woman lives another 20 to 21 years. For couples, there's a better than 50% chance at least one spouse reaches their 90s. A 30-year retirement is not an edge case. It's the median scenario. Design your savings for that timeline, not a shorter one that feels more manageable. Sixth, stop measuring yourself against averages. Measure yourself against your past trajectory. The median net worth numbers in this video are benchmarks, not verdicts. What matters is the direction you're moving and whether you're moving faster than last year. The Martins aren't a financial success story yet. They're a work in progress. But they now understand something they didn't before. They're not behind because they failed. They're behind because the costs arrived before the tools did. And now that they can see the sequence clearly, they can interrupt it. They can't fix 20 years in 1 month, but they can make one decision this month that changes the trajectory, attack one debt, automate one contribution, lock in one expense, and they can do that again next month. That's what the data shows separates the households quietly building wealth from the households quietly falling further behind. Not a single dramatic choice. A consistent small gap between what comes in and what goes out, invested repeatedly over time. If you found this video useful, a like helps more people find it. And if you want to go deeper on any of the specific topics we covered today, debt payoff strategy, retirement planning, or understanding what your social security benefit is actually going to look like, those are all videos I've already made or have coming soon. But before you go, here's the question I want to leave you with. We talked today about the typical American, the median, the middle of the pack. But the most financially successful households in America aren't doing anything exotic. They're doing ordinary things at a slightly better rate than average, slightly more consistently than average, for slightly longer than average. The question isn't whether you can become one of them. The question is, which decision do you make first?